The company that predicted its own death and did nothing. Kodak. In 1975, an engineer built a machine that would eventually destroy his own company. His bosses saw it work. They understood exactly what it meant. And then they did something almost impossible to believe. They buried it and kept selling the thing it was about to replace for the next 30 years. This is the story of the only company in history that invented its own killer and still couldn't survive it. Kodak wasn't a struggling company caught off guard by technology. Kodak built the technology. In 1975, a 24-year-old engineer named Steve Sasson walked into a conference room at Kodak headquarters in Rochester, New York, carrying a toaster-sized machine that took 23 seconds to capture a single black-and-white image onto a cassette tape. It was the first digital camera ever built, and it was built inside Kodak by a Kodak employee using Kodak's own research budget. What happened next is the entire story. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand what Kodak actually was in 1975. This wasn't just a camera company. Kodak controlled roughly 90% of the film market and 85% of the camera market in the United States. At its peak in 1988, Kodak employed over 145,000 people. The company wasn't just profitable. It was one of the 5 most valuable brands on the planet, alongside Coca-Cola and IBM. The business model was elegant and almost impossible to compete with. Sell the camera cheap, or even give it away, and make the real money on film, chemicals, and paper. The things people had to keep buying over and over for the rest of their lives. Every photograph anyone took was another sale. Every roll of film developed was recurring revenue before recurring revenue was even a term anyone used. This is the business Steve Sasson walked into when he showed his bosses a machine that needed no film at all. And here's the part almost nobody expects. Kodak's executives didn't dismiss the technology because they didn't understand it. They dismissed it because they understood it perfectly. According to Sasson's own later accounts, when he demonstrated the camera, the reaction from management was some version of, "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." Not because it didn't work, because it worked too well, and it threatened the exact revenue engine that made Kodak one of the richest companies in America. This is the moment that defines the entire collapse. Kodak had 2 paths in front of it in the mid-1970s. Path 1, cannibalize its own film business early, lead the digital transition on its own terms, and use its dominant brand and massive research budget to own the next era of photography before anyone else even understood it existed. Path 2, protect the current profit machine for as long as possible and hope digital photography stayed a niche curiosity. Kodak chose Path 2, not once but repeatedly for decades. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Kodak kept investing in film. It launched new film products. It expanded film manufacturing. Meanwhile, digital imaging technology kept improving outside the walls of Kodak's own invention. In Japan, in Silicon Valley, inside the very same conference rooms where the idea had first been shown a demo and quietly shelved. By the late 1990s, Kodak wasn't unaware of digital photography anymore. Everyone was. Digital cameras were now commercial products from Sony, Canon, and Nikon. Kodak tried to respond. It released its own digital cameras. It even briefly became a real player in that market, at one point the top-selling digital camera brand in the US in the mid-2000s. But by then, the real threat wasn't even a separate camera anymore. It was a phone. When smartphones arrived with built-in cameras, they didn't just replace the digital camera market Kodak had scrambled to catch up to. They eliminated the entire concept of a dedicated camera as a purchase most people needed at all. And they did it while destroying the one thing Kodak's entire empire had been built on for a century: film, developing, and paper. The recurring purchases that had made every camera sale just the beginning of a customer relationship. The numbers tell the rest of the story with brutal clarity. Kodak's revenue, which had once made it one of the largest corporations in America, collapsed as digital photography and then smartphones took over. Employment fell from a peak of roughly 145,000 in 1988 to a small fraction of that by the 2010s. The film business that had funded that entire empire shrank toward irrelevance. On January 19, 2012, Eastman Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company that had invented the camera that ended its own business model spent its final years selling off patents, including many related to digital imaging, just to stay afloat. It emerged from bankruptcy in 2013 as a much smaller company, a fraction of what it once was, pivoting toward commercial printing and imaging services far removed from the consumer photography business that had made its name. The most quoted line from this entire story, often attributed to insiders reflecting on the decision, captures the core mistake. Kodak didn't fail to see the future. Kodak's own people built the future. The failure was refusing to let that future compete with the present that was still making them rich. And this is exactly why Kodak's story is different from almost every other corporate collapse. This wasn't a company blindsided by disruption. It was a company that manufactured its own disruption in-house and chose not to use it. The lesson isn't innovate or die. That's the version of this story everyone already knows, and it misses the actual mechanism. The real lesson is sharper. The biggest threat to an established business is rarely a technology it doesn't understand. It's a technology it understands perfectly and chooses to suppress, because acting on it means competing against its own most profitable product. Kodak had the invention. Kodak had the brand. Kodak had the money to lead the transition on its own terms. What it didn't have was a willingness to let a $20 digital sensor cannibalize a business built on billions of rolls of film. That decision, made quietly in a conference room in 1975, is the actual sunset clause on Kodak's empire. It just took 37 years for the sun to finish setting. If a company inventing the exact thing that destroys it sounds impossible, wait until you see what happened at Blockbuster, who was offered the chance to buy Netflix for $50 million and laughed them out of the room. That story is next on Sunset Clause.